Okay, wonderful. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a part of our Roy Talk series where we get to have conversations with the artists whose work is on view in the gallery. And I'm very excited to welcome you all to the conversation today, Aaron and Dee and Carmelo. We'll talk a little bit about your work today. Before we get started, I want to make sure that I thank the sponsors who make opportunities like this possible: the Ohio Arts Council, the Greater Columbus Arts Council, and the Columbus Foundation. Their support means the world to us and to the emerging artists that we serve. And it's wonderful that their generosity helps us keep events like this happening at Roy. So let's just have a conversation today about your work. If you don't mind, maybe just introduce yourself first and talk a little bit about the work that we have here in the gallery. I've placed myself strategically, so there's artwork behind me, so you can kind of refer to that if you like. I was sharing earlier that we had yoga here this morning, and it was really wonderful to be amongst this inspiring work to start my day at 6:30, which required 2 alarms to get me here, but nonetheless. So I'm not sure who wants to begin. Don't make me call on you.
I can go. I'm Carmelo Amenta. Some of my work in the show is from my MFA thesis last year called Intricate Rituals, which is right behind Lynette that she was pointing at. There's 8 photographs at Roy right now, ranging from 12 by 16 to 24 by 36. And it kind of looks at growing up in a Reagan conservative household and being queer and looking at queer bodies in relationship to kind of the Reagan cowboy like masculinity, using the body as landscape to kind of talk about the closet and the open range in their kind of similarities.
Great, thank you. I know at the opening reception, we had a family who was here and talked about cultural identities and with respect to how we treat our bodies and talk about our bodies. And that was a really, that's the most wonderful thing about Roy and the art that we have here, that it does start those dialogues and that interaction with visitors to the space. So thank you very much for sharing your work with us. Okay, who's next?
Sorry, it took me a minute to find my unmute button. Hi, I'm Dee, Darren Lee Miller, and you can see my work behind Lynette there over on the other side. So these are all portraits from a project that I began at the start of the pandemic in 2020. It's called How Do You Want to Be Seen? And the title of the project is literally the question that I ask people when we begin the process. I think in part I began doing this because I needed to find a way to connect with people. I was new to Columbus, although I was in Brazil when it happened, and then ended up sort of living in Puerto Rico and teaching at CCAD sort of from San Juan. Life gets complicated in ways. And, I found that because I was sort of uprooted and moving around, that I felt a bit disconnected from people, from peers, from community. So I began reaching out on gay dating apps to find ways to create queer community, and working with people over a series of months, sometimes 8 or 9 months, to really brainstorm back and forth on ideas and build trust to make the portraits together.
That's great. I particularly like how the work is presented, especially the conversations and the background for each of the subjects, particularly because they really do have some agency in how they're being seen. And so that's really wonderful. I'm seeing visitors to the gallery who are spending some time with each of the works to understand the backstory and the interaction. So that's really valuable. Thank you for sharing that. Aaron, that leaves you.
Hey, I'm Aaron Peters. My work, well, a little bit is behind Lynette. That is actually Easy Blue, that neon piece. There's 2 other works as well, which I, as a whole, name Early Blue. These works are sculptural works. They're kind of in space. They are about looking and being in space and being present, seeing. a bit about the liminal space as well. Also, I mean, these are very much, I'm dealing with a lot of things in craft and glass, and kind of labor and things like that, and making. One of these pieces, that cardboard, there's a cardboard piece as well that's a little bit older, but these other two pieces, the neon work and the sort of soldered glass piece, are fairly new. And so I'm still thinking about those two quite a bit too, and where those are going to head. Yeah.
That's great. Actually, that's a wonderful segue for the next conversation I wanted to have, and that is it's all making, right? You're all making this work. Some of your work, Aaron, begins with found objects, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that and the balance of making work in conjunction with some found pieces too. It's not very easy to show this, but this is the cardboard piece. And it's really interesting, the perspective of it when you're closer to it and further away, and how you interact with it and how you see yourself reflected in it. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, even in relation to photography, a little bit, that piece is very related, I think, to seeing in photography, which I think goes with Dee and Carmelo, obviously. And also I'm thinking about Carmelo. I'm not even talking about myself, but Carmelo, using found imagery as well. So I think that's interesting too. Just thinking about found. But that cardboard work, is somewhat based, in laminating cardboard, found cardboard, pretty much just taking like cardboard boxes continuously and kind of breaking down those cardboard boxes and laminating, as in laminating like plywood in a way. So gluing layers and layers of cardboard together, and then kind of cutting down and processing through and making these screens. And so that's literally, I mean, that's how I kind of made this process on my own. But also in relation, the stained sort of glass work is also found glass, from packs of do it yourself glass like packs or whatever, if that makes sense. Like it's these beveled kind of pieces. So I'm always kind of looking around for material in a way that's found. I think I don't know yet right now to say about that as much, but
Well, I'm kind of curious about that as, sometimes with artists who work with found objects, you're often thinking of something that you want to create. And so you're looking to find something, you're looking for something particular. And oftentimes you'll just find something and it will speak to you about how you can use it in your making process. Do you find both things are true?
Yeah, that's yeah, I think even maybe the differences between, maybe, I don't know how Carmelo found, these photographs, right? There could be a difference or similarity in how we're finding material. There's a bit of for me, a little bit of, yes, trying to find something and then finding that thing that answers, your question, or maybe your kind of what you're trying to figure out. You're like, oh, I find this object that, or this material that works in what I'm thinking about or what I'm working on. Sometimes it's literally just finding something and then holding on to that thing for quite a while, and sometimes then you kind of find an answer for it in a way. That beveled glass is kind of like that a little bit, where it was just kind of a material that I knew meant something to me and was worth holding on to. And then it kind of, finding an answer for that material in a way. I don't know if it's ever one exactly, one way or the other. Okay. Yeah, wondering maybe Carmelo too about that, finding images or something too. I would like to hear about that too.
Yeah, want to pick up that thread, Carmelo?
Yeah, I mean, mine comes from kind of like a multifaceted like research angle of like when I first started making this work, I was like going to libraries and renting out like sorry, my studio assistant is behind me. You know, always needing attention. um, but he but I so I started like going to like my university library, like trying to find like archival magazines. So the sourcing for my work is from the height of the HIV and AIDS epidemic to the year I was born. So I was like kind of looking for this like niche year of like Gentleman's Quarterly, like gay porn, any kind of magazine where I could like see kind of the quote unquote like fetishized male body and kind of recontextualize it. And then I started going on like eBay and Etsy and like finding these magazines and like internet archive like places. And then after a couple of months, I found this like website that archives and sells gay porn magazines from that era, from this era, and fairly like affordably too, because a lot of places will sell them for like a lot of money because they're not in print. Like they're pretty like hot commodity sometimes. So I was able to like find some affordable ways to like buy these bulk magazines and ephemera to be able to use in my work, just through like research and like skimming the internet and going to like kind of quote unquote shady websites occasionally. And like
I would love to see your browser history.
it's like a nightmare sometimes. Like during this, I like really use the private browsing when making like really headlong into this work. My last year of grad school, private browsing was a good friend of mine, because if it not, like it would just ruin my search history for a long time.
Yeah. That's interesting too. I mean, because you're intentionally finding objects, but from your own past and your own experiences and your own curiosity, deliberately seeking out some of those things. But I'm sure along the way of intentionally looking for something, you're finding things that you maybe did not expect, or that led you in a different path, or something that resonated with you in a different kind of way.
Yeah, totally. And I think a good representation of that is like the photograph that's like directly behind you. It's titled "I Saved Him for Later." Um, I think one of my favorite things about like making this work is what's left over from the bodies that have like consumed this media. Um, that dog ear has probably been there for who knows, 3 years, 20 years, 30 years. I don't know. But when when that specific magazine came into my possession, that page was folded and saved for later by the previous consumer. And that kind of, when I started noticing those trends in this, was like, oh my God, this is kind of becoming something more than just like talking about myself. It's becoming referentials of the bodies that have consumed this media before me as well. So then became like really layered with like, I'm talking about myself, I'm talking about my own experiences, but then the past experiences are also kind of still being like leaving these ghost trails behind me as well.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. I'm thinking of like my own experiences with, in college used books, right? Someone wrote notes and recognized the same passages that I did, or those kinds of connections that you have with someone who's experienced the material before you. Interesting. And so you're finding, if we can stay on that theme, D, these relationships with people, right? That you hadn't known before. And I had shared with you that there are a couple of subjects who I knew, but in different ways. And so I found new things about them through your work too, which is really wonderful.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, some of the people that we have in common in the Columbus community, we get to know them in different ways. Unlike the other two artists that are in the show right now, my practice is not so much about working with found materials or appropriation. But Lynette, as you pointed out, I suppose I have been in one way or another collecting creative collaborators and friends along the way, which I'm really grateful for. But to the work, I think that in terms of a research-based practice and ways that might connect with what the other two artists are doing, I am looking at really historical painting, figurative painting, Renaissance painting, portrait painting. One of my mentors from years ago used to say that I, wanted to be a painter, but I don't know how to draw very well. So I use a camera, which there's some truth to that, I think.
Yeah. They are very painterly. Yes, I mean, the subjects are with objects that are, maybe important to them or precious to them or set in a particular way. I particularly enjoy, who's the figure in the bathtub, and you're just seeing the back, but then the front of the face has a totally different posture in the mirror that you're seeing too. So, and different sides of that, which is also resonating in Carmelo and Aaron's work also, that you see them in one way, and then if you just take a moment, you can see them or something different about them in another way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for noticing that. And I'm really cognizant of how I'm using light and color. And I am often taking cues from specific historical paintings. Not that I want to recreate them, but I think that oftentimes there were pictorial strategies that other artists figured out that I can take advantage of.
Sure.
And some of the things that they wanted to communicate, I can either sort of vibrate along with them, or more often than not, try and turn it on its head, or as I like to say, to queer the intention in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. In the same ways, and not necessarily in queering it, but in having a different perspective of it in like a Kahindi Wiley sort of a way, right? Where you're taking something and you're making it your own. So yeah, that's very interesting also. So where is the work taking you next is my next question. So are you building on this series of conversations and encounters and doing something else with that? Or are you going in a different direction? What is next for your work?
Oh, I'll answer briefly, and then the other artists I think also might want to speak to this particular question. I feel like I'm nowhere near done with this portrait project. So how do you want to be seen is continuing. The ways in which I incorporate the words of my collaborators may shift over time. I've landed on one particular solution for this show and the show that's up in Dayton, but I'm by no means sort of have decided that that's really the way it should go. I do have some other projects in mind, especially one to sort of take up in Puerto Rico that might be more of a kind of social practice. But I continue doing these portraits here in Columbus and in San Juan.
Yeah, that's great. Carmelo, maybe you can pick that up. Where is your work going from here? What's next for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still working on this body of work. I have been since 2020. I think I'm slowly starting to like phase out of it a little bit. I'm working on a book of like the big collection of like all these photographs and like the text that's included with it. That's hopefully I'm gonna finish by next summer and then start doing some publishing stuff with that. But I have some new work kind of boiling in the little cauldron in my brain that I want to start getting into very much so as soon as we speak. But it's just a matter of time sometimes. Like this intricate rituals is kind of very easy to get into because it's basically like culling through archival material and then making a photograph with it, where like sometimes other work is like the work that I'm leaning into for this next series that I'll start working on shortly has like it's a lot more labor intensive in photo making, so it's a daunting task in itself of like getting a camera, getting a new camera and then taking it onto the world and photographing some queer sites along the way.
Yeah. I know that when we worked together previously, you were printing on vinyl. And so you were adhering those directly onto the surface of the spaces. These are works that were printed and then framed. And maybe you can speak a little bit to like the evolution of that. What made you determine that this is how you're going to present your work now? Or is it just a natural kind of experiment with the next way to share the work?
Yeah, it kind of felt almost like a natural transition. That previous work really lended itself to like this flatness on the wall. I mean, it was kind of a hodgepodge of like this body of work called Polari Codes, which was archival work that was kind of dealing with weird coded language and objects that had these like archival photographs with these high res scans of like bandana code colors on them. And I felt that them being flat onto the wall really helped create a pop and a really great dimensional space, along with the body work that kind of was in conjunction with that. Forest Cruise also lent itself to like this flatness because I was putting life-size photographs of myself into landscape.
Yep.
So then there became this like weird Trump Lloyd dimensionality to it that lent itself to flatness on the wall. But this work felt like it needed frames, and I kind of always have wanted to work against like traditional photography presentation. I've never been one to use it. I always tried to like find a new way to like have my work exist inside of like the white cube. But as time went on, when I was making this work, I was like, I just kind of want it to exist. And I saw these like raw wood frames, and I was like finalizing the work for my thesis show, and I was like, I think this is it. Like the raw wood frames kind of being natural, then having these like natural bodies, talking about landscape, talking about the body, talking about like personal issues. It all kind of became this like nice little conjunction of like a perfect storm of things just working out, which kind of never happens in art making sometimes. And it ended up just working out the way that I wanted it to, and having these like natural frames with these bodies that are kind of starting to mimic landscapes.
Yeah, it's sort of also, you know, in conjunction with the whole like masculine perceptions and materials and raw, rough wood kind of. And that sort of is, I mean, I don't know, Aaron, to speak for you, but something similar in the way that you present your work. Each of your three pieces is presented very differently, directly on the floor. I love how the neon is sort of camouflage, how it's plugged in the material, you know, the mechanics of it with the bags of sand, but how they're juxtaposed against that really thin line, that very almost ephemeral neon pieces. And then your really beautiful clear glass pieces have some spaces in them. They're not all filled with glass, but then it's grounded on this really solid metal base. So that's of interest to me, how you present your work also.
That's a great, that's a really nice observation. And yeah, it's interesting. And maybe it's somewhat partly traditionally like kind of a sculptural kind of method of making work, and kind of having, you know, sort of delicate and you know, softness and then hardness, you know, these kind of things that are contrasting one, you know, heaviness and lightness. That can be really nice and beautiful in sculpture. And so yeah, I do. Both of those, even what you were talking about, both of those works, I guess, in kind of in relation to the question of what's of like kind of what I'm kind of doing now. I guess. Is yeah, definitely. Those two works again are kind of the newer works. So definitely interested in sort of the mixture and the kind of pushing of these materials
Yeah.
and these processes of like neon on the ground and kind of giving it you know then this neon piece kind of there's a little bit of a delicate nature to it. And then with the stained glass, kind of beveled glass, getting more into the possibilities of that and not just having it as window works as two-dimensional work, right? Because this material is normally used primarily as a two-dimensional material,
Right.
as a window material. And so both of those works, at the moment, with bevel glass, stained glass, I'm really trying to kind of learn a lot more about that sort of craft, I guess. That's what I'm doing right now. Actually, I'm like at a residency making a window. So that's one
Great.
thing. So I am
Uh-huh.
like really thinking about that material and kind of where that's going. And also, it relates to this cardboard work in that it is sort of a flat, sort of two-dimensional thing. Normally, even a window piece, right? Stained glass window piece, it's like two-dimensional. But what I do like about glass and stained glass is that it can be two-dimensional, but can still be installed in space and work three-dimensionally in a way, even though it is two-dimensional. It can really like take over space and kind of you can use space in a way and use light in a way. So I might be rambling a bit.
No, that's good.
Those are kind of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great because the beveled piece is in the gallery. It's right in the front windows. It gets beautiful natural light throughout the day and really does fill the space, even though it is clear. But it really does have a gravitas to it, a space that it takes up in the gallery. So that's really wonderful. One of our interns actually knows how to work with glass from your instruction. So I'm wondering how, because all of you teach, so I'm wondering how your instructing others informs your work and what you're learning from your students as you're teaching your students things. And we can pick that up, whoever wants to go and answer that question first.
sure, I can kind of from there. Yeah, I mean that's the thing is I actually have no proper teaching in stained glass work. No one has really taught me that. But I kind of took it upon myself to teach others, even though I haven't really been taught it in a way. So that's kind of been my teaching method somewhat is kind of um, not necessarily needing to know how to do something before kind of engaging with each other and kind of learning. A lot of times this is in processes of like making things.
Sure.
More so, I think it's kind of easier to kind of do that in a way to just kind of embark on processes together, even though maybe I don't fully understand how to I'm never really a master at any of these things, to be honest, either. And so that's been kind of something that's a part of my teaching, at least, and partly goes into like how I'm making things and what I'm making.
Great. Dee or Carmelo, you want to pick that up?
Sure. Well, when it comes to working with students and what I learn, I think I'm really, really grateful every day for the interactions that I have with students. I don't know if I express it to them exactly this way, but being a professor is a little bit like being a college student forever because
Ah,
the learning never stops,
right.
and what the students bring to the table, their concerns, their interests are really things that keep me curious, they keep me asking questions. And so I learn a ton. At CCAD, I do think that there's an expectation in our curriculum that there's a certain kind of expertise that we're bringing to the technical table. And I have that. For years I worked with a 4x5 camera, so I'm shooting negatives that are quite large. And I shifted to digital not too long ago. But the other thing I'll say is that digital technologies, the cameras, the Adobe suite of programs, while the big picture on how these things operate has remained consistent, the more granular pieces of exactly how to use the tool in the most efficient way is constantly changing. And so in as much as I'm teaching students how to use these tools, how to become proficient or fluent, and how to make the most efficient use of the resources, they also often teach me ways to use tools that I hadn't thought of, that I, again, just really appreciate. And especially in Adobe Photoshop, there's like 5 or 15 different ways to achieve a similar result, depending on what kinds of tools or what sequence of tools you use. And the way that I sort of default to doing it has a lot to do with my age. And because I came up as a darkroom photographer and was working with traditional materials for a very long time.
Sure.
And so I end up using Photoshop as if it's a darkroom in a way.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess the takeaway for me is that it's an awful lot of fun.
That's great. Carmelo, you're going to be teaching, you're teaching a few classes now, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be teaching at CCAD in the spring as well. I feel kind of the same sentiment as Dee does. I mean, I feel like a forever student. I mean, I don't think I've had a year in my life that I can remember that I wasn't like in school, actually. Like, I went from high school right into undergrad, right into grad school. Like, I've just always been in academia, which feels weird to say. But at the same time, the thing that goes on in like young artists, like freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior, undergrad students, are something to be enamored with, because they think about things in I think a very different way than like quote unquote me, the big A trained artist, think about things. Like I've kind of forgotten some things and trust my instincts a little bit more, but some questions I get from students are like absolutely wild. I'm just like, oh my God, I've never thought of something that way. Now I need to try that out. Like
Yeah.
how, like, not only to see if it works for you, but like, could it work for me in a certain way? I think feeding off of that type of energy is something that has really helped my practice, not even as a lecturer, but also as like a student. I would always have conversations with my faculty members, my studio mates, about ways to think about navigating our mediums in new ways, in new fascinating ways that maybe haven't been thought about or maybe considered for a while or ever. And students really like to throw curveballs sometimes of like, is this possible? Can I do this? And the joy of like being a lecturer and a professor is like, I don't know, but let's try it.
Right.
If it fails, it fails. Failure is part of the job. And if it works, hell yeah, we just made something really awesome. And I think it's such a privilege to, like, to quote Dee, like, be the forever student and constantly learn and grow and think about things with other people that are just as interested and fascinated in what I do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just respond to something that Carmelo was saying? And I think, in as much as we're helping students learn the skills that they need to articulate whatever it is they want to communicate in the work, I think that one of the things that I really focus on with students is building the muscle of creativity through an iterative practice, meaning trying and failing and trying and failing and seeing what happens, and something happens that you don't expect, and that's cool, and you decide to go in that direction. I think maybe not in this room, but sometimes people are just assume that creativity is something that someone is born with, that there's like talent. And I'm not a big believer in talent. I mean, I'm a big believer in practice
Mhm.
and just practicing and practicing and practicing. And I think creativity is definitely something that we can learn. We just need to keep our inputs fresh. Go for a walk in the park, read a book, watch a movie. I don't know, have like dinner at the Somali restaurant that you've never been to, something.
Right. So how are you all utilizing critique when you're talking about, learning and learning? I don't want to say failing, but trying and doing and all the things. How is critique important in that practice, or is it important in that practice?
To me, I think it's one of the most important things. I've always been a big proprietor of the critique in undergrad and in grad school, and now, and I think I try to be very transparent with my students, is like, and myself, when I've gotten critiques, is like, it's a professional thing. Like, and sometimes it's hard to like dissociate and compartmentalize that idea of like, especially when you're critiquing a friend's work, but like, you need to kind of compartmentalize the personal when doing it, because that's how the person grows. That's how they make the best work possible, in my opinion. And being professional and helping them grow in that is something really important. And making sure for students, like using proper language and discussing art is really important. I try to like make sure we don't use "I like," because it doesn't really give much essence. Like, why do you like it?
Right.
And then they normally then start to describe why they like the thing or why it's working. Instead of just do like, I like this. Well, why do you like it? What's working in the composition or the colors or the subject matter to make you like it, instead of just like kind of the baseline. And in my critique environments, I'm like the professor that like forces participation. Like, it's part of your grade. You have to talk. And if you don't talk, I make notes of it. And because I think everyone has substance to say and everything is just important.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in all my years of critiquing and being critiqued is like, the way I look at work is completely different than the way you look at work, Lynette, and then how Aaron looks at work and how Dee looks at work. And I'm not going to grow unless I hear what other people are seeing about my work to make it like the best possible work. Right.
We have critique here at Roy. We offer it every other month. And an artist that we are very familiar with here at Roy, sort of spearheads them. I'm always interested in the process of it. My heart goes out to all of you. I don't know how you create. I'm not a maker, but I'm in awe of you, and that you're so vulnerable in that moment to share your work and to receive feedback on it. It's always amazing to me. And it is such a wonderful environment for that exchange. She creates a really wonderful space for that. So yeah, I think it's very valuable. I'm glad that artists are able to utilize it. Aaron, Dee, do you want to reflect a little bit on critique for you and your practice?
Sure. At the moment, I mean, for me at the moment, I mean, as teaching goes, yeah, critique is quite important. I mean, it's even just to be comfortable with talking about art.
Yeah.
It necessarily doesn't even have to be right or wrong. I think that's something that can be hard for a beginning artist in any way, is just being comfortable with speaking out loud about what they're thinking when looking at art, right? At the moment for myself, I'm just got out of grad school, so I'm interested in critique and where to find it, and kind of for me at least, I think you also get to a weird point where group critiques are a little daunting and a little difficult to kind of figure out, for myself at least. I do like sort of one-on-one or conversations between a couple
Uh-huh.
people, more so now than I enjoy critiques, larger groups and things like that, because that can get sometimes can be sometimes confusing in a way.
Sure.
Sometimes it's very difficult to kind of really figure out what is going on at times for yourself. And that's just my own kind of experience.
We often will have artists whose work is on view here. We'll bring in a few colleagues and just a small group and an intimate conversation, which I'm glad they find very beneficial. I always learn something also. So yeah, setting the right, space for that and the right tone for that, definitely.
Well, going back to something that Carmelo mentioned, it's moving away from statements of personal taste,
Mhm.
instead to go into statements of meaning. I feel like the way to get to those statements of meaning, or to sort of have people feel vulnerable enough that there's enough trust in the room to express, how something makes them feel or what it reminds them of, that does require efforts in community building to begin with, before jumping into the process. Having people get to know each other, having people get to share what's important to them.
Right.
And I engage in my classes, and just like in my creative process and the work that you see, I call it a dialogic process. And so to describe that, it's like a lot of times we come to school thinking that we're there to like win an argument, right? We're going to have a debate,
Right.
and whichever idea is the strongest one is going to win. And I think that there are spaces where that may be an appropriate way to learn, but for critique, it can be very problematic because it silences people who tend to be more introverted.
Mhm.
But also that idea of debate and winning, for lack of a better word to use here, can be kind of racist and heterosexist in terms of the value structure that comes down through evaluating what is here and what is here.
Sure.
So instead, if we can describe and then use that descriptive piece to begin to analyze and interpret things, that can help us go a long way toward understanding to a certain extent what people might want to communicate or how they might want to affect the viewer. I think another important piece then is to ask the maker questions and to just listen, like truly listen, without formulating inside my head the kind of response I want to give. I just need to be there to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is important, right? Reflecting on, listening, actively doing so, learning something as a result of it. Speaking of which, we generally keep these to an hour. So we're at like 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that we have space for you to ask questions of each other or to share anything that you would like to share. I always have a list of questions just in case, but I am kind of curious, like what's next for you, as in, do you have some shows that you are in, a residency, something that you're doing? You're now becoming a drummer, Aaron. What's going on in the background there?
I'll say I'm at a residency right now.
Uh-huh.
This is usually used for a music residency, that the house I'm in right now. So I actually moved all this shit in the corner.
Lovely backdrop.
I needed a lot more room, so I kind of moved everything. But I'm at a residency in Michigan called Prairie Ron. It's in a small town called Vicksburg,
Mhm.
Michigan. Like I kind of said before, I'm working on some window pieces, trying to kind of learn more about that kind of stuff, because it's a whole kind of thing. I Other than that, I have a show in June in New York, at this place called Urban Glass, which
Great.
is which is actually a public access glass facility in New York. It's probably one of the best ones, I would say. That's what I hear. That has also a gallery space and a store, and so I'm gonna be showing actually some mostly neon work, and
Oh,
a cardboard kind of work too that I have to work on,
okay.
and in June. So that's primarily what I'm doing.
That's great. Yeah, Dee, what's next for you?
Well, right now, in addition to the show at Roy, I have a solo exhibition in Dayton, or just outside of Dayton, at the Rosewood Gallery in Kettering.
Yeah.
That show is up until the middle of November, and I'll be doing a gallery talk there on November 12th. I have a piece in a group exhibition down in Cincinnati as part of Photo Focus at Iris Gallery there that was curated by Bill Messer.
Oh, yeah.
And I also have a curatorial practice. So there's a show that I co-curated with my colleague Tim Rietenbach here at Columbus College of Art and Design in the Beeler Gallery. It's called 1,000 Miles Per Hour. That's up until the end of the week. So it's been a busy like 6 or 8 weeks for me. After this, I don't have commitments on the horizon, but I do have a number of things that are out there waiting to see who bites and when. Mostly I focus on showing my work in nonprofit and educational spaces rather than commercial galleries. And so keep my fingers crossed, and I'll let you know when the next thing comes along after December 31st or January 1st.
Great. Yeah. Look forward to hearing about that. Carmelo, I know you have some time at home that you're going to be utilizing to do some creating and
Yeah, so I have fingers crossed a book coming out next summer. Hopefully I'm finishing it up. I mean, I've been working on it for God, a year and a half now. But I always want to add more and then take some away. I have a friend writing a foreword for the book as we speak. As for shows, I don't have any shows coming up. I kind of been neglectful on that part of my practice, just working on the book. It's kind of taken up a lot of my free time. But I do have some work coming out in a book next year as well, published by Julie Ray Powers, called Queering Appalachia's Visual History, a collection of queer Appalachian photographers, authors, and editors. And it's being published by the University of Kentucky Press, so look out for that if you're so inclined. It's full of a bunch of great artists, and Julie Ray is a phenomenal publisher and bookmaker and photographer, and it's been a privilege to be able to work with them. As for anything else, and just bookmaking and teaching has taken up a lot of my time. It's a pretty arduous process that drives me insane most days.
Well, if you're doing it well, it takes up a lot of time. Yes, that's right. Very thoughtful in your practice. I want to leave room for you to ask any questions that you have of me or of each other, or.
Yeah, I actually do have a question for Dee and Aaron. So you guys both kind of have this representation of bodies in your work, where Dee, yours is more kind of direct representation. We have like traditional portraits of bodies, where Aaron, yours is kind of this extreme abstraction and gestural with the cardboard piece, but also the neon piece and the glass piece kind of have these representation of like this abstract body, with you being able to see refracted bodies through the glass piece, but the neon piece is like this very gestural body. And if either of you can talk about how the body kind of navigates within your practice and work, it would be awesome.
I don't know if you can see that. Did I do that very well? Oh, there you go. There's a glass piece. Okay. Try not to make you dizzy.
You go first, because it's a good question. I'll go first for me.
All right, so gosh, how do I want to respond to that question? It's a really thoughtful question. In terms of where the body comes in, I will tell you that I don't know how I want to respond, and I'm thinking on the fly as we go. I think that I'm really interested in storytelling, right? So in terms of the bodies that you see in the images, and to what extent they represent like something authentic about a person, I will say that I'm skeptical that drawing or painting or photography or really anything representational can get at like the heart of or the kernel of truth of who someone is. I think that we're not, as people, or even reality itself is not so easily reduced. And we're, different at different times. We're multifaceted. So it's not that the photographs and sort of my depiction of the figure is false. What it is, especially with photography, it's a fraction of a second in a particular place and time.
Right.
And the bodies themselves and the ways that I'm using visual signifiers or tropes that have existed for a very long time in art history. I'm, even if you're not familiar with the specific paintings that I might be referencing or the specific kinds of hand gestures that we're seeing in classical painting, I think that most of us, even those who aren't trained as artists, are at least a little familiar with that.
Mhm.
And so it can call back to that. But what I want to do is not just reinscribe the same values in the same story. I want to question it. I want to pick away at it a little bit. I want to turn it on it.
Great. Yeah, I also am like on the fly on this, because I probably haven't fully been able to fully talk about or really being able to wrap my head around just thinking about the body. And I love that now there's this other body coming into view of the questioner. Like, it's great. I don't know. I think even in sculptural, like, it's interesting to think about myself as I started out in photography as well. That was literally like kind of the thing that got me to love art and art making was photography. And so I do think a lot about perception as well, and kind of, ties a little bit to Dee's kind of answer, and just thinking about our perception and kind of being in space and time. And so some of that is very much, happening with like the reflective kind of nature of my work, and the spatial nature of my work, and even just in general working with light. So there, there's some kind of, making bodily forms in sculpture has just been happening forever, and kind of understanding like history and being somewhere, and understanding, I don't know, there's a little bit of like a weird inward kind of thing happening when you kind of look at even just thinking about like a marble statue or something like that, and which I really enjoy. But there's a little bit of like a breaking down an element of kind of perception that I'm thinking about with some of this. I think the neon piece, there's kind of a breaking down happening. And so I've been thinking a lot about that too. And there's kind of been a little bit of thinking about death quite a bit in a weird way. And I'm still kind of going through this sort of thought process of that. And so that ties in as well into this breaking down. And I think about that again with elements, I guess, and seeing is again another element. It's really part of that. Yeah.
I have a question that goes off of that.
Yeah.
I feel like both of you are using various strategies to push the disintegration of the found materials that you're working with, like literally having them break apart. And I wonder if either one of you, that's not really formulated into a question, it's more an observation, but would you like to respond to that observation?
Yeah, I can. It's kind of something that became significant very early on in this work of, because what I'm calling from is printed in halftones, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a printing process where you use CMYK dots to make full colors. And as I expand these photographs and make them significantly larger, I mean, most magazines are printed like 8x10. And the photographs that we see in the show are significantly larger than that. it became important that the body kind of disintegrates. It becomes these fields of color because that references the landscape. It all becomes this idea of the body being one with like the earth, and the queer body being one with the earth as well. Like, and it again harkens back to what I said earlier of like referencing the closet and referencing the open range in which the cowboy roamed, and how they're kind of hand in hand. There's both isolation in them, but different types of isolation. And I thought, and as I started continually working on the work, that disintegration of the body into these like color fields became like significant, because from far away they're just regular bodies or like forms of bodies or parts of bodies. Then once you like get up close, you just see dots and colors and matrices, and it becomes like, it just boils down to like our bodies are kind of just these four colors mixed together in the printing process, which has always been kind of heavily delved in my practice, like this, the idea of using a printer as not only a means to make the work, but also as part of the practice in my work is like digital printing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes, yeah. I have a relationship to material in a weird way. Like I had worked in a salvage business for quite a while, so there is this sort of recycling nature of material, and so for some, I'm linking that up a little bit to the body a little bit too, and this sort of disintegration and breaking down, right there. That was kind of my job too, was this like sort of type of like of gathering and breaking down, and then kind of from there it's this rebuilding or reforming. And so there's quite a bit of that. I'm thinking a lot about that, and that's kind of my own history. And so I think that kind of lines up a little bit with Carmelo a little bit too, is this sort of like again, breaking down and kind of reforming. And then it's like, is it just this kind of, is everything kind of just made of this molecular kind of elements or something like that? Yeah,
Interesting. I hadn't observed that, but that is very interesting. I'm particularly thinking about the closer you get to Carmelo's work, you're right, it breaks up. The same with the mirror piece and the cardboard. You see yourself, you don't see yourself. And even in Darren's work, I'm angled this way because there are a couple of pieces whose natural light is hitting and you cannot even see the image at all, which is also kind of interesting how that's perceived, because as soon as the viewer gets to it and blocks the light, then you can have the image revealed. So very interesting, even the space and what it's doing to your artwork too. Yeah, it makes me think.
And one thing I'll say about those pieces is I don't get into the technical stuff too much, but there's elements of collage in many of my works, not all, which creates that kind of surrealistic effect, right? Because what I create is an impossible kind of lighting or an impossible sort of field of focus that may not be readily apparent to the viewer at first, but they can look at it and think, well, something here is strange.
Yeah. Interesting. Good questions, good conversation. I appreciate that very much. Anything else before we close out our time together? I don't want to leave anything unasked or answered. No? Good. I so appreciate the conversation. I learned so much. Thank you all very much. And the work's on view at Roy until November 4. So we're looking forward to seeing more viewers in the gallery. As we're chatting, we've had people come in and see the works, and so that's been good too. So yeah, great. Well, thank you all so much for your kind attention. I do appreciate that. And as we said, we recorded this, and so we'll post it on our YouTube channel. All right, get back to the studio practice.
Thanks, Lynette.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. See y'all.
Bye.